What if the most honest conversations about you happen where you'll never see them? I've spent a month analysing thousands of anonymous female confessions from private forums, the digital diaries of our time. Today, 5 shocking truths she admits when you're not listening, including the real reason women cheat that has almost nothing to do with you not being good enough, and everything to do with a feeling you may not even know she's chasing. These are the secrets that drive everything from attraction to infidelity, thoughts that rarely, if ever, get spoken aloud to a man. What you do with this information is up to you, but you can't say you weren't told. Let's get into it. Confession 1. She may secretly want you to lead. The first confession is one of the most controversial and counterintuitive ideas in modern dating. Publicly, in an era of empowerment and equality, many women will say they want a 50-50 partner. They want a man who is their equal, who consults them on every decision, and who never imposes his will. But privately, in anonymous confessions, a different story emerges. A powerful and recurring theme is a deep-seated desire for confident, masculine leadership. Let me read you a confession I found, this one from a woman in her late 30s, married for a decade. I love my husband. He's a good man, but I'm exhausted. I have to decide what's for dinner, what we do on the weekend, where we go on vacation, how we invest our savings, everything. He always says, "Whatever you want, honey." He thinks he's being nice, but what I hear is a man who is afraid to make a decision. I don't want a dictator, but God, just once, I wish he would just handle it. I wish he would plan a date, grab my hand and say, "Be ready at 7, I've got it covered." I secretly dream of being able to just turn my brain off and trust his direction. This isn't an isolated feeling. One theory behind this stems from a desire for psychological safety. The thinking goes that a woman feels attracted to a man who can handle things, who has a plan, and who can be a rock in the chaos of life. When a man consistently defers every decision, he can subconsciously communicate that he can't be relied upon to lead when it really matters. He's signaling passivity, not partnership. This is what some psychologists call maintaining frame, meaning a man has his own mission, his own principles, and a direction for his life. He invites a woman into that journey, but he doesn't make her the sole architect of it. She feels his certainty, and it allows her to relax. This dynamic isn't about control, it's about polarity. A woman can't fully relax into her feminine energy if she feels she always has to be the one making the decisions, and resentment is often the result. So what does this mean for you? It does not mean becoming a domineering jerk or ignoring her opinion. That's just weakness pretending to be strength. True leadership is about gentle, confident initiative. It means when she asks, "What should we do this weekend?" you don't say, "I don't know, what do you want to do?" You say, "I was thinking we could either go for a hike or check out that Italian restaurant you mentioned. Which sounds better to you?" You provide the options, you set the direction. It means having an opinion. It means having a plan for your own life that you're executing, with or without her validation. Start small. Plan the next date from start to finish. Make the dinner reservation. Decide on the movie. Handle it. Watch how she responds. You may be shocked to find that the woman who says she wants to be in charge is deeply relieved and attracted when you prove, quietly and confidently, that she doesn't have to be. Confession 2. Her biggest regrets are often the opposite of yours. The second confession is found not just in words but in pain. It's about regret. When men and women look back on their romantic lives, they are often haunted by profoundly different ghosts. Understanding this difference is like getting a cheat code to her psychological operating system. In short, studies on regret have found a fascinating pattern. Men's biggest romantic regrets are often regrets of inaction. They are haunted by the chances they didn't take, the girl they didn't ask out, the words they didn't say. Men regret the shots they didn't shoot. Women, on the other hand, can be different. While they also feel the pain of the one that got away, research, including studies from Northwestern University, has shown that women are often plagued by regrets of action. They are haunted by the men they did give their time to, the relationships they stayed in too long, and the wrong choices they made. Think about it. She regrets the toxic ex she stayed with for 3 years. You regret the girl from college you never asked out. Different ghosts haunting different minds. One study found that romance was a source of major regret for 44% of women, compared to only 19% of men. Their confessions sound like this: "I regret giving my 20s to a man who never intended to marry me," or "I regret sleeping with him on the first date because I thought it would make him like me more." Her romantic past is often a landscape of actions she wishes she could undo. His is a landscape of actions he wishes he had taken. One powerful explanation for this is rooted in evolutionary biology and parental investment theory. The idea is that for a man, a sexual encounter can be a fleeting moment with few long-term consequences. For a woman, Historically, that same encounter could mean 9 months of pregnancy, the dangers of childbirth, and years of raising a child. The biological stakes have always been higher for her. Because of this, her psychology may be finely tuned to be incredibly cautious about who she grants access to. A bad choice for her is a far more costly mistake. So what does this mean for you? It means you have to understand that her yes is infinitely more valuable than yours. When she chooses you, she is making a decision weighted with thousands of generations of risk assessment. Treat it with the gravity it deserves. This is also why being a man of integrity and good character can be so powerfully attractive. It's not about being a nice guy, it's about being a safe bet. When you show consistency, honesty, and a clear moral code, you are soothing the deepest, most ancient part of her brain that is terrified of making another regret of action. Don't pressure her, don't try to manipulate her. Instead, focus on being the kind of man she will never have to regret choosing. Be the man whose actions align with his words. Be the man who makes her feel safe, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. In a world of potential regrets, be her one certainty. Hold on, before I continue. Ask yourself, have you ever felt her emotionally pull away but couldn't explain why? Keep that question in mind as we dive into this next confession. Confession 3. For many women, infidelity is an emotional escape, not just a physical one. Now we need to tackle the toughest truth: cheating. This isn't about excusing infidelity, it's about understanding the warning signs before it happens. A lot of men assume that if a woman cheats, it must be a physical failure on his part. The other guy had more money, a better car, or a better body. And while those things can play a role, the anonymous confessions of women who have strayed often point to a different, more painful truth. For many women, infidelity isn't an act of lust, but an act of escape. I read a confession on a private forum that sums this up perfectly. I'm paraphrasing, but it went like this. It wasn't that he was more handsome or that the sex was better. It was that he saw me. When I was with him, I felt alive and visible for the first time in years. My husband looked at me, but he hadn't truly seen me since our first date. The affair was a fantasy, a place where I wasn't just a wife or a mother, but a woman desired for her mind, her humor, her soul. The emotional intimacy was the real betrayal. The sex was just a consequence. This is a recurring theme you see online and in research. While it's a generalization, studies have repeatedly shown a pattern where men report being more devastated by sexual infidelity, and women report being more hurt by emotional infidelity. Research from institutions like Kansas State University and Chapman University found that a majority of women said they would be more upset by an emotional affair than a physical one, and it can go both ways. When women themselves cheat, they are often more likely to report feeling in love with their affair partner. They chase an emotional high, a feeling of being the center of someone's universe again. What this reveals is a deep desire not just to be loved, but to be desired in a holistic way. The confession isn't, "I wanted sex with another man." The confession is often, "I wanted to feel like the main character in my own life again, and another man offered me that role." This may also be why some studies suggest that women can be less likely to want to reconcile after an affair, because once they've experienced that emotional escape, returning to a reality where they feel invisible can feel impossible. So what does this mean for you? It means your presence, your focused presence, is your greatest asset. It's not enough to be in the same room. You have to be in the same emotional space. It means putting the phone down when she's talking, and actually hearing her. It means a small gesture that says, "I was thinking about you today." It means continuing to date her, to court her, to explore her mind long after you're both settled. She doesn't just want your loyalty, she wants your focused, undivided attention. That is the currency of desire. The men who forget to provide it risk their woman seeking it from someone who will, because the craving to be seen is one of the most powerful human drives of all. These next two confessions get even more revealing. If you want weekly psychology insights most men never learn, hit that subscribe button. 96% of this channel is men seeking truth. Join them. The secrets ahead separate the men who get it from those who stay confused. Confession 4, her white lies, can signal a lack of emotional safety. The fourth confession is a subtle one. It's not a dramatic secret about a hidden affair, but a quiet, everyday pattern that most men completely miss. It's the world of her white lies, the small truths she withholds, and in those moments, she might be confessing a quiet lack of confidence in your ability to handle the truth. Now, this is different from the decisive leadership we discussed earlier. Section 1 was about taking initiative and having direction. This is about emotional resilience, your ability to handle uncomfortable truths without collapsing or exploding. Think about it. You buy her a gift you're excited about. She opens it and says, "Oh, honey, I love it," with a bright smile. But months later, you find it in the back of the closet, unused. Or you ask her if she's upset, and she says, "I'm fine," through a clenched jaw. Or you ask for her opinion, and she says, "He seems nice," when in reality, her internal alarms are screaming. These aren't always malicious deceptions. In her mind, she might be trying to protect your feelings, or avoid a conflict she believes you can't handle. But there can be a deeper confession here. An anonymous post on a relationship forum shed a brutal light on this. A woman wrote, "I lie to my husband about little things all the time. I lie about how much I spent. I lie about liking his mom's casserole. I lie about being too tired when I'm just feeling disconnected. I used to think I was being nice, but I've realized I do it because I don't trust his reaction. I don't trust him to handle the truth without getting defensive, angry, or collapsing into insecurity. Every lie is a small admission that I don't think he's strong enough for my reality." Read that again. I don't think he's strong enough for my reality. That's the devastating part. Every time she feels she has to withhold a truth, no matter how small, she may be subconsciously communicating that she doesn't feel safe with your reaction. She is assessing that the cost of your negative emotional response is higher than the benefit of the truth. This is a catastrophic failure of emotional leadership. A man who is the emotional rock of the relationship creates an environment where the truth is welcome, even when it's difficult. A man who is emotionally volatile, who gets easily offended, who becomes defensive, or who needs constant validation, creates an environment where lies can feel like a survival strategy. So what does this mean for you? You have to build a fortress of emotional stability. The next time you suspect she's not telling you the whole truth, don't get angry or accusatory. Create safety. Say, "Hey, I feel like something is on your mind. You can tell me. I can handle it. Even if it's something I don't want to hear, I want to hear it from you." And when she does tell you a hard truth, that she doesn't like your shirt, that your comment hurt her feelings, that she's worried about money, your reaction is everything. Don't get defensive. Don't crumble. Just listen. Thank her for her honesty, and then respond calmly. Your goal is to make the truth a safe place for her. When she knows, without a doubt, that you are strong enough to handle her reality, she will stop creating a fake one for you, and only then can you have a truly honest relationship. This final confession is the master key to understanding all the others. It ties everything together: the leadership, the regrets, the emotional escape, the white lies. Stay with me. Confession 5, she might test you, and it's not a game. The fifth and final confession is something that drives most men crazy: the concept of her tests. These are the seemingly random challenges, the arguments that pop up out of nowhere, the moments she pushes your buttons for no apparent reason. Many men see this as drama, irrationality, or even a game. But in the private world of female confessions, it's often revealed for what it is: a deeply ingrained, sometimes subconscious vetting process. Consider this confession from a woman on a private blog. "Of course I test him. I don't always mean to. It just happens. I'll pick a fight over something stupid, just to see if he'll stand his ground, or if he'll fold just to make me happy. I'll act distant, just to see if he'll notice and have the confidence to come closer. I'll challenge his opinion, just to see if he really believes it. I need to know he's real. I need to know he's strong. My heart is a castle, and I'm not just going to leave the gates unlocked. I need to know the man standing there is capable of protecting it." This is the core of it. These tests aren't always conscious, manipulative games. They are often subconscious probes from the part of her psyche that needs to feel secure. It's the part responsible for making one of the most important decisions of her life: choosing a mate who is competent, reliable, and strong. She's checking your foundation. She's poking and prodding at the structure you've built to see if it's solid. Will you crumble under pressure? Will you abandon your principles just to appease her? Are you a rock or are you sand? Remember the emotional escape from confession 3, the need for leadership from 1, the emotional resilience from 4. Her tests are checking if you're the man who provides all of these consistently. When you say you're going to the gym 3 times a week, and she says, "Oh, but I wanted to cuddle and watch a movie tonight," that's a potential test. When you state an opinion and she challenges it with, "Are you sure? I read something different," that could be a test. When she's in a bad mood and lashes out, she's testing whether you'll remain calm and centered, or if you'll get dragged into her emotional storm. Men who fail these tests often do one of 2 things. They either get aggressive and angry, revealing their emotional instability, or they become weak and passive, caving immediately to avoid conflict. Both are failures in her eyes. The man who passes is the one who remains centered, calm, and unwavering in his own reality, while still showing love and empathy for hers. So what does this mean for you? Stop seeing her tests as attacks, and start seeing them as opportunities. When she tests your commitment to the gym, you don't get angry. You smile, kiss her, and say, "I'll be back in an hour, and then we can cuddle all you want. I have to keep this promise to myself." You acknowledge her desire, but you hold your ground. When she challenges your opinion, you don't fold. You say, "I hear you, but from my perspective, this is how I see it," with quiet confidence. You pass her tests not by fighting her and not by surrendering to her, but by simply being the man you claim to be, consistently and without apology. When she feels your unshakable core, she'll finally feel safe inside the walls and won't feel the subconscious need to keep testing them. Conclusion. So there you have it. 5 truths confessed in the quiet, anonymous corners of the world, from the subtle desire for leadership to the landscape of her regrets, the emotional drivers of infidelity, the meaning behind her white lies, and the relentless purpose of her tests. As you can see, a common thread running through all these confessions is this: women often respond to the strength of your character and the stability of your emotional core. They are drawn to the man who is present, the man who leads with gentle confidence, the man whose integrity makes him a safe harbor, the man strong enough to handle the truth, and the man who remains unshakable under pressure. These confessions aren't an indictment of women, they are a roadmap for men. They are a guide to understanding the unspoken language of attraction and respect. The mainstream conversation might tell you to always defer, but these confessions reveal something different. Women respond to authentic strength balanced with emotional intelligence. Not dominance, not passivity, but grounded, confident masculinity that creates safety and polarity. The question isn't whether you believe these confessions. The question is, what are you going to do with this information now that you have it? Will you dismiss it? Or will you use it to become the kind of man that women not only love, but deeply and secretly admire and respect? The choice, as always, is yours. If these hidden truths opened your eyes, then you absolutely need to understand the psychological hurdles that come next. That's why I've made a video on the one test every woman will put you through. It's the master test that all the others lead up to. Click the video on the screen right now to watch it and continue your education. Don't get left in the dark. I'll see you over there.